The air was heavy with the warmth of late afternoon when the herd came to a sudden stop. A faint cloud of dust lifted around their massive feet, then settled into stillness. At the center of the group, pressed low into the dirt, a young calf lay struggling to rise. His small body shifted, legs folding awkwardly beneath him, yet the effort brought no progress. One attempt ended in a dull thump as his weight returned to the ground, and the herd immediately responded, forming a protective wall around him. The matriarch stepped forward first, her broad frame anchoring the group. With a slow sweep of her trunk, she brushed across the calf's side, her touch gentle but searching, as though reassuring him and herself at once. Others followed, their trunks resting briefly against his back, his ears, the ground near his head. A deep rumble moved through their bodies, low and steady, like a current of comfort pulsing around him. Yet their stillness carried unease, an ancient recognition that one so small should not remain on the earth for long. The calf's breaths came shallow, his sides lifting unevenly. Dust clung to the wetness of his skin, streaked darker where he had pressed against the ground. From a distance, rangers watched, keeping low and quiet, knowing the elephants would not allow intrusion. The path ahead narrowed between thickets of acacia, but the herd refused to continue. Each great body turned slightly inward, forming a barrier that no other creature could cross. Their sheer presence held the place in silence, as if the landscape itself had paused with them. The older females shifted occasionally, their massive ears folding and fanning, but their eyes never left the calf. One younger bull moved forward, extending his trunk toward the earth beside the fallen one, then stepped back with a restless sway. Their weight pressed deep prints into the dirt, yet none advanced. The matriarch lowered her head, tusks angled close to the calf's flank, then lifted again, as though urging without force. Still, the little one trembled, legs weak, unable to rise. The rangers whispered softly among themselves, measuring distance, noting the herd's posture. None dared move closer. The elephants gave no ground, and their silence spoke more than warning. It was a plea without sound, a declaration that they would not leave until the young one found his feet or was lifted safely. One calf from the outer ring gave a soft call, high-pitched and uncertain. It echoed briefly against the scrubland before fading back into the still air. The fallen calf's ears twitched, his head tilting slightly toward the sound, but his body remained heavy, pressed low as though the earth itself held him. The herd stirred, several shifting weight from one leg to the other, a collective unease rippling through them. But none abandoned their post. "Easy now," one ranger murmured under his breath, barely louder than the wind. His words carried no command, only respect for the weight of the moment. The sun pressed downward, angling shadows long across the dirt track. Insects stirred in the heat, but even their whine seemed muted beneath the quiet strength of the elephant's vigil. Dust clung to their wrinkled hides, catching in the creases around eyes that watched endlessly. Time stretched, marked only by the calf's shallow movements and the immovable patience of the herd. No predator dared approach. The barrier of bodies, tusks gleaming faintly in the angled light, was warning enough. Yet this was not aggression. It was devotion, ancient and unspoken, a circle drawn tight around the smallest among them. The path lay open before them, the journey unfinished, but the herd would not move. Their great frames stood fixed in the fading day, surrounding the trembling form in their care. In that stillness the land held its breath, waiting with them, the dust hanging low as though it too refused to drift away. The dust still lingered low over the narrow track as the herd adjusted their weight, drawing tighter around the calf who lay trembling at their center. Their massive bodies shifted into a circle, each animal turning slightly inward until the young one was enclosed in living walls of strength. Shoulders pressed close, tusks angled outward, ears lifting and folding in a rhythm of unease. In the stillness, the formation spoke with clarity. No harm would pass through them, not while the little one struggled to draw breath against the earth. The matriarch's trunk lowered again, tracing a slow arc across the calf's back. Her touch carried weight and patience, brushing dust from his wrinkled skin, pausing briefly at his small ear before lifting once more. Another female, younger but steady, leaned her forehead near his side, her trunk resting on the ground close to him, as if grounding them both in the moment. A low vibration pulsed from within her chest, a sound so deep it seemed to merge with the earth, offering reassurance that he was not alone. From a careful distance, rangers remained crouched in the brush, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. They moved little, speaking only in soft murmurs when necessary, their voices no louder than the hum of the dry air. The herd's posture left no room for intrusion. The circle was not a barrier to keep danger out, but a statement of loyalty that required no translation. The rangers understood. To step closer now would be to break a trust not yet offered. The calf's legs shifted weakly, pushing against the ground as if to rise, only to falter and fold beneath him once again. His small trunk lifted halfway, curling briefly before collapsing into the dust. Each failed effort stirred the herd. A ripple of movement ran through them, ears fanning, trunks lifting toward the sky before lowering in unison to touch the calf's body again, one after another. As though passing along courage in silence, the sun pressed harder against the land, drawing shadows beneath the elephants' bellies. Insects drifted lazily through the heat, but none dared near the circle. The ground beneath the herd darkened with prints pressed deep by their steady weight. Even in their stillness they conveyed power, yet every gesture bent gently toward the one who lay in need. "Steady now," a ranger whispered faintly, his words lost to the open air. He knew the elephants could not hear him, yet the phrase hung between his breath and the silence, as much for himself as for the calf. Minutes stretched into long passages of waiting. Occasionally, one of the elephants shifted her stance, nudging closer to lean her massive frame into the arc of protection. Their trunks brushed lightly across the calf's small body, movements neither frantic nor forceful, but tender in a way only those who have carried loss can show. At times, the matriarch turned her gaze outward, her great head lifting as if measuring the distance to the rangers, weighing the space between trust and threat. Her eyes held no panic, only certainty. They would remain until the calf rose or help arrived. The calf's sides moved unevenly, his breaths short and sharp. A soft, plaintive cry broke from his throat, high-pitched and trembling, cutting briefly through the air before fading again into the stillness. The sound stirred the herd. Several trunks lowered in response, curling briefly around his small limbs, sweeping gently at the dust as though clearing away the burden of the ground itself. The rangers waited with equal patience, their hands resting loosely at their sides, their bodies stilled by the gravity of the moment. They were witnesses to an ancient ritual of care, a reminder that strength can be expressed not only in power, but in the refusal to abandon the vulnerable. The circle held, unmoving, their shadows growing longer as the day stretched forward. Around the fallen calf, the great bodies breathed as one, their trunks lifting and lowering in quiet rhythm. The air felt suspended, bound by the weight of devotion. No one rushed, no one left. The land grew hushed, and within that silence the herd stood firm, a living wall of protection around the smallest heartbeat among them. The air thickened with waiting as the herd held their ground. Hours had passed since the calf first stumbled into stillness, yet not one elephant shifted from the circle. Their great bodies stood like carved stone, each angled toward the fragile form at the center. Dust clung to their hides, stirred only by the soft swaying of ears or the occasional sweep of a trunk. What might have been a pause in their long journey had become something heavier, something deliberate. They would not move until the small one was safe. The calf's breaths were shallow, his sides rising and falling with uneven rhythm. His legs trembled with every effort to push against the earth, but each attempt gave way to collapse. His trunk rested in the dirt, shifting weakly as though he could no longer bear the weight of its small length. Around him, the herd's trunks reached down in quiet succession, brushing his skin, tracing the lines of his body with gestures that were both urgent and restrained. No loud trumpets filled the air, no display of panic, only silence broken by the calf's thin cries, each one sharp against the muted land. From a distance, the rangers watched. Their forms blended into the brush, their movements careful and minimal. They spoke rarely, and when they did, their words were hushed, carried low to avoid breaking the fragile balance of trust. One ranger adjusted his stance, eyes fixed on the matriarch, whose gaze had shifted toward them more than once. Her presence alone anchored the group, her ears slowly folding and lifting as though weighing the space between caution and appeal. The elephant's refusal to continue spoke louder than any sound they might have made. The herd knew the safety of the wild lay ahead, yet they lingered here, exposed on a narrow path with no cover from the heat. Their stillness became its own message, as though their immense bodies asked the question without words. Would the humans step forward, or would they leave the calf to fate? The calf shifted again, his trunk lifting weakly before dropping into the dust. A thin cry followed, carrying into the open space, raw and unguarded. The matriarch responded instantly, lowering her head and sweeping her trunk across his side. The others followed her lead, their trunks converging around him in overlapping arcs, weaving a quiet language of reassurance. Their movements held an unmistakable plea, a silent insistence that time was running thin. A ranger whispered faintly, his words more exhale than speech. "We have to wait," he said, though his own stillness betrayed the weight pressing on him. None among them wished to cross the invisible line too soon. A step forward at the wrong moment could scatter the herd, leaving the calf vulnerable and the trust broken beyond repair. The standoff deepened, each passing minute stretching longer than the last. The herd remained, their eyes steady, their massive feet rooted to the ground as though bound by something larger than instinct. Even the young calves, restless by nature, stayed close to their mothers. Their trunks curling around familiar legs, their movements subdued by the gravity that held the group. Above, the sky softened with the approach of evening. Shadows stretched across the track, pulling the light into longer lines. Yet still the elephants did not move. Their presence bore the weight of expectation, a living wall that held until choice became inevitable. In the silence, the message was clear. This was not hesitation. This was not uncertainty. It was a demand, quiet, steady, undeniable. The herd would not leave without him. The men did not rush. Every step was measured, every gesture softened by the weight of what lay before them. They had seen animals broken by fear, startled into panic by a single wrong movement, and so here they moved as if through water, slow, steady, deliberate. The calf's breathing was shallow and uneven, each rise of its ribs quickened by exhaustion. Dust clung to the folds of its skin, and its trunk rested weakly on the earth as though it no longer carried the strength to search for air. The herd had not shifted. Their broad shapes stood like shadows cast in the dimming light, a wall of silence and stillness. Not one foot pressed forward, not one tail flicked in restlessness. It was a quiet that carried its own pressure, as though the very air had thickened with the weight of their presence. The matriarch, tall and firm, faced the rescuers with unblinking focus, her tusks catching a pale glint of sun. Around her, the younger cows closed ranks, forming a patient yet tense barrier, watching not with hostility, but with an unspoken question. The calf made a low, muffled sound, half cry, half breath. The sound seemed to ripple through the herd, their ears rising, their trunks lifting slightly, but then lowering again as if acknowledging that the moment had not yet been answered. The rescuers knelt close, one man resting his palm lightly against the calf's side, gauging the pulse of life beneath the skin. Another crouched at the rear, checking the angle of its hind legs where the strain of being trapped had pressed them into the hard earth. They spoke little, their words scarce and softened by the knowledge that anything louder might unravel the fragile balance holding herd and human together. "It's okay, little one murmured, his voice barely carrying beyond the curve of his mask. Ropes were prepared, not as tools of force but as extensions of steady hands. Loops were placed carefully beneath the calf's body, eased beneath its shoulders and chest, with the gentleness of men laying cloth over something sacred. The calf shuddered at the first touch, its trunk lifting weakly, eyes rolling with a flicker of alarm. One ranger placed his palm flat on the earth just beside its head, not pressing, not restraining, simply grounding the space with calm. The calf stilled again, its breath rattling but steadying. At a signal, the ropes drew tight, not yanked but coaxed. The men leaned their weight backward, their boots pressing into the soil, their movements choreographed in silence. The calf's body rose in increments. First its shoulders lifted free from the deep impression in the dust, then its chest shifted forward, then slowly, its hindquarters came clear. The sound of straining rope was muted beneath the deeper sound of its breath, rasping but alive. The herd did not move. Their stillness had become a shelter, their collective gaze forming an invisible corridor through which the calf was being guided back to its feet. Only the matriarch's ears shifted, a slow wave forward and back, a silent measure of time passing. At last, the calf's legs, trembling and stiff, were coaxed beneath it. Its knees buckled once, folding awkwardly before the rangers steadied it with their hands at its sides. Dust cascaded down its flanks as its body pressed upward again, wobbling but held by quiet determination. Its trunk swept the ground once, dragging in the dust before curling upward slightly, the smallest gesture of returning awareness. The men released their hold, stepping back in unison, their arms dropping, their bodies retreating by instinct rather than order. The ropes slipped free, sliding onto the ground like lines no longer needed. The calf stood, unsteady but upright, its body swaying gently as if the earth itself was helping it relearn balance. The silence deepened once more. The herd's eyes did not blink, their ears did not flutter. They held the moment, watching, waiting, until the small form before them found its breath. Deeper now, fuller. The calf's trunk extended toward the space between its rescuers and the herd, wavering slightly before it fell again, but the gesture was enough. The sun, low and stretched, broke across the dust, throwing long shadows from both man and beast. In that fragile light, the calf stood, fragile yet upright, while the herd's stillness wrapped the clearing in quiet acceptance. The calf swayed uncertainly, legs trembling beneath the sudden weight of its own body. For a heartbeat, it seemed the ground might claim it once more, but then its stance steadied, small hooves pressing into the dust with fragile conviction. The rescuers had already stepped back, leaving space, their presence receding into the background as if the moment no longer belonged to them. What had begun with human hands now belonged entirely to the herd. The matriarch shifted first. She did not trumpet, nor did she rush. Instead, her vast form moved forward with a quiet certainty, her trunk lowering until its tip brushed lightly against the calf's flank. The touch lingered, neither urgent nor forceful, but carrying a weight of reassurance only her presence could give. The younger cows stirred behind her, their heavy ears folding forward, their bodies swaying with a rhythm that seemed to call the calf back into the circle of their care. The calf let out a soft, broken rumble, barely formed, the sound vibrating in its chest more than in the air. Its trunk curled toward the matriarch, faltering before falling back. Still, its feet shifted. One step, then another, tiny motions that broke the stillness of the herd. The air seemed to loosen with that first movement, as though a held breath was finally released. The men remained motionless, their task complete, their silence binding them to the moment as observers. One ranger lowered his gaze, dust settling across the toes of his boots, while another watched the calf with the steady calm of someone who knew to let nature reclaim its own. No command was given, no gesture made. Only the softest whisper passed between them, carried more by breath than by sound. "You're almost there." The matriarch stepped again, her massive body casting a long shadow over the calf. With each pace, the younger ones followed, their circle tightening and then opening just enough for the little one to walk among them. The calf's steps were uneven, knees bending awkwardly, trunk dragging along the ground, but each movement carried a new fragment of strength. The herd adjusted to match its pace, slowing, waiting, never hurrying it forward. Dust lifted under their feet, rising in pale clouds that drifted in the fading light. The calf's sides heaved with the effort of each breath, its small body still bearing the strain of its struggle. Yet its head began to rise, ears twitching as if listening again to the deeper voices of its kind. A low murmur rippled through the herd, soft rumbles exchanged from chest to chest, a conversation too ancient for words, yet clear in its meaning. They had waited. Now they would walk. Step by step, the group shifted into motion, leaving behind the place where the earth had nearly claimed one of their own. The rescuers did not follow. They remained rooted where they stood, allowing the herd the dignity of departure without interference. The men knew the rhythm now belonged to the elephants alone, and so they watched in silence as the line of gray bodies passed into the open plain. The calf stumbled once, its legs folding for a brief moment, but immediately the matriarch's trunk brushed its side again, steadying without restraint. With a small, determined push, the calf righted itself and pressed on, the dust of its misstep scattering into the air. The herd slowed, encircling it, their mass moving as one, until the calf regained its place among them.